We have about half an hour for our panel discussion. You already have seen all of our faces. I haven't really properly introduced myself, I feel like. So I'm Alexandra Klemme from ZMT, and I'm the coordinator of the TropEcS currently. And yes, Jan, Yusang, and Veronica, you have already met during their talks today, so we want to get some expertise from you. We had some guiding questions over the day. I don't know if you've seen it. They were in the session abstracts. And the guiding question for our first panel, or first session today, was how can global couple models capture land, atmosphere, ocean interactions, and what near-term steps would most improve their relevance for coastal dynamics without compromising large-scale skills? So maybe you've seen that before, maybe you haven't. Keep it in mind for our panel discussion. The second session had also an overarching question, and that was, how can regional models be more effectively nested within Earth system models, and what benchmarks are most useful for representing tropical coastal and nearshore dynamics? So all in the idea of the TropEcS idea, how can we better represent the coasts? Now, I will go back to these questions in the end of the panel discussions, so we have some concluding remarks on what your takeaways were. But we want to start on some questions on your specific expertise first. So I have prepared some questions, and we're open for your questions. And we also, as input also for our perspective paper, would like some input from you. There will be some audience participation in part of a poll. But first, let's come to you three. Maybe Jan, you're sitting right next to me, and you gave us a really nice introduction of how you envision TropEcS to utilize the Earth system model and the coastal components. So our questions to you would be, what would be the next actionable steps you could think of to improve the coastal representation in Earth system models, or to gain knowledge to get an approval? Do you have any input of what steps you would see are actually actionable to go in the right direction for TropEcS?
Yes, so thank you for the kind introduction and for inviting me to join this panel discussion. It's a great pleasure to be here and discuss TropEcS. And before I address the question, I would just like to encourage that. So what I've noticed today is that there are people from different backgrounds in the audience and in the room, and I think that's exciting because it means an interdisciplinary effort. And I think it's important that people start to communicate by maybe explaining their respective disciplines in a sort of simplified way, so that there can be tight or increasingly tight collaboration between the disciplines. So on the one hand, let's say ecology and socio-economic questions, and on the other hand, there's physical climate modeling, and these two things have to be brought together. I think that's really important, actually. Okay, so to the question. So I think one key aspect of getting the coastal modeling right, or approaching coastal tropical coastal modeling, is to understand the specific challenges of the coasts. So one being that the coasts have strong gradients between the land and the ocean, and then also within the ocean there is the bottom topography is really important. So the fact that the surface is actually it's very shallow, so the water is very shallow, and this creates a lot of complications. So I think we have to deal with the increase in resolution in a coherent way. So we need to increase model resolution locally, and we have heard one way is mesh refinements. So, for example, in so-called unstructured grids, ones that are not rectangular, but where the grid changes in its structure. This is one approach we should probably take, but we need to discuss the timescales we're interested in. So the higher the resolution, the shorter the model time steps have to be. That's something we have to discuss, and maybe we have to make some decisions at some point. And then embedding this in the global context in the most meaningful way. Should it be a coupled model, as you say, or should it be a regionally downscaled model, which is basically offline, so it's an offline implementation of a regional refinement. And that depends on the questions, the scientific questions we want to ask. So I think that's another decision we have to take, probably together and discuss before that. So.
Yes, maybe I think especially with the shell topography box modeling, do you have an input on that, Yusang?
Yeah, thank you so much, Sandra. In terms of what you talk about more practically, I think it will be good. Let's maybe start from to understand the coastal what physical process we are going to resolve, right? What do we know? For example, like the actuary dynamic. Okay, then if the actuary box model is implemented, then we still have to consider what happens when the water is going to the oceans. So I just also mentioned the shelf break, like river plume in like Amazon River and also Columbia River. A lot of places has this kind of river plumes that could have a lot of impact in the implication for the ecosystems and even for the fisheries. A lot of implication for socio-economical impacts there. So physical process could be something we need to think about what exactly we want to resolve. Okay, what do you think?
So maybe I can comment on a few. So which process do we want to resolve? I think we want to resolve the core ZMT interests, right? So we want to resolve things like mangroves, for example, or the impact of climate change on coral reefs, for example, or of course the fisheries, like what is the impact of global environmental changes on coastal fisheries? Can we resolve marine protected areas, for example? Can we be more specific about how to design marine protected areas? Yeah. So I think, yeah, definitely estuarine processes are probably at the center of the modeling effort, for example.
Do you want to add anything on the context of the coastal implementation?
Yeah, maybe just that I do believe that, as I mentioned in my presentation, machine learning will play a role also in this model chain going from global to regional to local. And I think it's quite important that we derive more consistent climate information across scales. So that's where one could think about starting with Earth system models that are maybe a bit coarser. And then there are actually very good regional refinement processes, like even in a variety of models, including ICANN. So one could do regional refinement and then machine learning-based downscaling for a particular region in the coastal areas to cover this this more refined version of information we definitely require. And then maybe also one additional thought is that we also need to think more about impacts.
Yes, maybe that also goes to the question I had for you, Yusang, because you were talking really about this bridge between the global and regional models, downscaling, upscaling again. You were going in both directions. And our question to you was, to bridge these different scales, getting the coastal scales into the global model, would you think it's better to go for Zoom regions or more for nested regional models or some hybrid version in between? What would be your approach if you were to implement these tropical regions?
Yeah, so just like Dr. Irene talked about, I think impacts is actually the most important part. So we should bottom up, from the impacts, what can be influenced. Then think about, like, so for example, from our approach, from modeling approach, basically we start from the physical model first. So that's what I talk about. But indeed, like biogeochemistry part, also ecologies, right? Also the social impacts part. But however, each of these items will bring up different uncertainty. So let's make our problems much complicated. So what I think about in terms of how to determine these different regions, maybe start from which part may have largest impacts. And starting from this point, and we can see, maybe, for example, I'm more familiar with Pacific, so maybe along the coastal line regions, like Japan, Korea, the China coastline, these regions, we can pick up this trend. And also from the physical viewpoint, we may think about, for example, for South China Sea, there's some upwelling regions. That welling region, because it's more have the fish, what impact the fishery. And for example, another place like what I'm familiar is along the coral shelf, there's a place north of Taiwan, is a we call it Kotong regions, because due to the topography change. It's also a large fishery location, because in the future scenario, well, is that a good fishery plate in the future? That's the questions, because that can change how human may move next step. So probably I think we can start from these locations, what we currently feel, physically maybe important, also maybe social, ecologically important place. Maybe start from these regions and then building up our regions by regions, building up the nested approach to get the higher resolution we want. But that's pretty much
Yeah, I think we will have a lot more talks about these topics tomorrow.
Yeah.
So this is already a good glimpse into that. Do you want to add anything, Monica, Jan? If not, when we have these models, the next step would be to validate the results. And that's the direction our question to you, Veronica, would go into. How, when we get these models, also looking at CMIP7 at some point, how would we ensure that we can really properly validate them also specifically for these coastal regions?
Yeah, okay, maybe start globally, because we have a global model behind it. I just would like to encourage people to use we have worked quite substantially on this topic and have brought out evaluation tools. In fact, I'm not sure everyone knows, but there is the CMIP Rapid Evaluation Framework. So we worked towards that over the last 10 years, basically. So now when you submit your output to the ESGF, this CMIP Rapid Evaluation Framework runs, and it has some tools associated with it, including ESML tool, ILAMP for land, and others. So that gives a first assessment of the quality of the simulations, which I think is very good development, because we have a kind of a benchmark through that. Obviously then it's kind of everything is fit for purpose, right? And that is where with higher resolution, we might need to really develop new diagnostics and look at different observations to evaluate coastal regions in more detail. I don't think there is yet a full set of diagnostics defined to get more regional. There was the kilometer scale hackathon that looked into how to evaluate kilometer scale models. That's all very good development. Process-oriented is always important, because in many cases you have compensating errors. So you look at the quantity of interest, it looks fine, but when you look at the process, it just turns out it's not done for the right reasons. That's very bad. And we had this so many times. So I really encourage to not just look at the quantity of interest, whatever it is, but to look at the processes. And that's a hard job, but it's worthwhile, I would say. And then finally, I would say also that it would be very nice to set up a multi-scale evaluation framework similar to a multi-scale modeling approach, and to provide consistent informations across scales. So when you look at the coastal regions, you just zoom into a region, we have already heard ENSO is influencing and so on. So you really need to look at the broad system.
Yes, anything you want to add on that?
Yeah, I think the multi-scale evaluation, I feel is very important. But we have to identify, because different scale also have different process involved it. So maybe more how to quantitatively evaluate this, I think is some direction we should move forward. Particularly, more important is right now when we have AI involved, the machine learning things involved, then well, I do have some concern from my viewpoint, but I still think when we use that tool, we still need to be very careful about what physical process, what process can it tell us? Yeah.
Yeah, very fair point. I mean, that's actually when we develop AI hybrid Earth system models, or when we have data-driven models, we really need to evaluate the physical consistency. Like we need to look at whether we have like covariances are correct and so on. So we had this workshop in San Diego that I mentioned, Climate Bench, and this was a topic of key importance. So that's where, because when you have an AI-based model, you cannot assume that it holds physical consistency and is according to the physical laws. So we definitely have to test that. That's an absolute important point. Yeah, thanks.
Yeah, particularly for this kind of evaluation, it's not easy for using one single index or some just values to evaluate this, like the score. Because right now, a lot of like weather forecasts, they just look at the score, how it behavior. But after you look at the like conservation, mass conservation or energy conservation, you will find, well, there are some inconsistency built in within the model. So how can we explain that? Yeah, so it's not easy to explain just using one scale, something like that. Yeah. Any question?
Yes, I think it's not easy to explain is a very good last sentence for this part. Oh, yes, you wanted to comment there? Sure.
Just a side remark on data. I mean, ZMT has a tradition for going to the field and collecting data. And I think we can use TropEcS to sort of motivate a new set of field studies that specifically collect data that essentially only ZMT can collect, because we have the networks, the scientific networks and the collaborative networks in the tropics. We should use that because it's one of our core selling points, right? As an institute, we have this collaboration with tropical partners, and we should make use of that, and we should design field studies that specifically probe the realism of the simulations we're coming up with. So I think it's hard to evaluate a model without having an observational benchmark.
Yes, thank you for including that to our discussion. So I want to give you some chance to also ask questions, but before that, you might already have spotted the QR code behind me. That's the code I threatened you with, that we would have some participation of you also. So I will go to the idea of this. We want to get some input of what your state of mind is currently after this full day of talks we had on the topics. of how we could approach this implementation of the coasts. And the idea is to get this as a jumping off point also for the perspective paper. So we have just 4 or 5 quick questions, and I can ask you now to scan this QR code, or if you have your laptop open in front of you, you can also use the menti.com with this code here, whichever is more convenient for you. And I will already go to the next slide, but I can still embed the QR code, I think. So if you're still working on this. Already some answers are in. So the first question of us was, what part of the Earth system do you most work with? Just to get an idea of, if you give an answer that the ocean is the most important thing to ever look at, if you're an ocean modeler, maybe we have to prioritize this differently than if you're a social modeler, or this is not in here, but if you're an atmospheric modeler. So we have some ocean bias, I already see, in the room. Some that work on no part of the Earth system is also interesting. Maybe some indicator who wants to still put in their votes before I go on? No hands there. Then I can go on. So in addition to what Earth system component you mostly work with, we are also interested in what scientific field you're working in. So is it the physical, biogeochemical, socio-economic? We will see what... this is more diverse already. Mainly physical, but also a lot of socio-economical.
Can you show the video one again?
Yes. There it is. Okay, so, sorry, we have our background data here, so I would like to go into the actual questions we have for today's topics. So first of all, I can see it there. What do you think would need to be improved to better represent the coastal areas in the Earth system model? So where do we have the space for improvement to really get the Earth system model better in there? And we have some possible answers here. I think you're allowed to put 2 or 3 answers in. If you can't decide, 3, okay. And we will see how it fills out. So there's a lot of human impacts. That's what we're interested in, so that's good.
Put all of them. I think they are all important.
They're all important, yes. I wanted you to choose, so I only allowed you 3. Okay, so model results coupling is catching up to the human impact. Atmospheric forcing is not so much a priority in this room. Do you have an opinion on these choices of our colleagues? They're still coming in. Okay, maybe on the next slide, I would wanted to give you the opinion. If I forgot anything on here, you can put your answer that was not on the previous slide here. I will give you like 30 seconds to a minute to come up with additional points that we haven't covered on the previous slide. Tides. Okay. A little more specific than what we had on the previous slide, I think, but that's a good point. More data, yes. Okay, that's an overarching topic for all the points that we could improve probably, that data would help. Oh, there comes more. Coastline, surface-atmosphere interaction, biology. Yes, data observations. Ocean use, in addition to land use, that's interesting. Didn't intend to use AI, but good to know. So I think those votes are in. Then we have one more question that's more on the regional part. So for nested regional models, which benchmark parameters do you think are most important to get right for the coastal regions? We have options of the sea surface temperature and salinity, the sea level and tidal change, currents and circulations, the sediment and riverine inputs, biogeochemical variables, and the ecosystem indicators. It's a good mix, everything but biogeochemical. That's what I work on, so okay. Sea surface temperature, salinity, and currents and circulations in front. I mean, the answer, if I would have allowed, would probably be everything for all again. So this is always some separation there. You have an opinion on these answers that you see coming in?
I just feel the outcome is just what the data we analyze most. But there's
yes, there's a lot of currents and circulation in the physical color.
Yeah,
I see that.
these are very important, but I think others are also have some rules.
And I mean, biogeochemical has a lot of biogeochemical color. It makes sense that there's a bias. Okay, so we have the data for a jump-off point for our discussion in the paper, so thank you very much for participating in there. If there are additional benchmark parameters you can think of, you have some seconds to put them in here, if I forgot anything there. Few of you are looking at their phones, so I will wait for a moment. The waves. Subsurface temperature, okay, yes.
Yep. Yep.
The eddy life cycle, okay. Yeah, subsurface, especially in those shallow regions. Oxygen, okay. Prairie reductions. Okay, maybe I will go on here so we have time for at least one or two questions from your side. So let's doing this again. Okay. You can type your questions in there, but you can also just raise your hand. That's maybe easier, and we'll bring you the microphone so you can ask your questions to our panelists, if there are any left after this long day. There's one question. That's why everybody's looking up there. How would you model impacts beyond sea level rise and weather extremes, for example, minimum oxygen zones, fish stocks, and reef resilience? Any of you have input on that?
I can say something on the weather extremes. I would model them with, I would definitely go for the approach that utilizes machine learning to create large ensembles. And also, yeah, on the rest, I give this to you, Jan.
No. I just see the word beyond here, so maybe we're supposed to comment on things that go beyond the weather extremes. If I can understand the question correctly, how would you model impacts beyond sea level and weather extremes? So oxygen minimum zones, fish stocks, reef resilience, right? So this is the whole question about how to model the biological part of the Earth system in the coastal regions. And I think today the session was less focused on that, but I think it will come tomorrow.
Tomorrow there are a lot of talks on this topic specifically, so maybe this question can now come up on tomorrow's panel discussion when we have the experts on that topic on the couch.
So I think this is probably maybe the more difficult part even than the physical part to get the ecosystems modeled coherently, given the limitations that a gridded model or a grid-based model actually has. When a grid box has several kilometers diameter, then it probably is difficult to implement a single coral or something like this. So we should probably discuss what the benchmark will be, right? I must say I'm challenged.
You want to add?
Sure, particularly because we did indeed have some study for the fish stock. One example is the Japanese eel. You know, eel, like in Japan, if you eat sushi, okay, that's an eel, okay. Actually, eel corresponds directly with the NEC bifurcation. So we can actually build up several models, physical, mathematical models for this fish stock. Another example from our study is the mullet. Mullet is also a common production fish in the western of the Pacific. And also, we actually also found it correlate with some climate index pretty well. So these kind of things could be based on some governmental data, and in addition to some our knowledge, climate knowledge, could be able to model it. Maybe not the first order estimation, but at least give us some kind of ideas. Yeah.
Yes.
Maybe one more point that I think we really need a flexible system to simulate this process. I was actually overlooking beyond because I couldn't turn my my head enough. But I think that something as what would be really beneficial when we go so fine scale is use of emulators of components that we don't really that we just need as a forcer. So we should think of a very flexible system to also better span the uncertainties which we certainly have in these processes when we start resolving them and including them in the models.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yes.
But that comes back to the same problem of data. Need to have enough data to, right?
Yeah, there's a common theme there.
Maybe for the case study regions that we defined in the proposal, one could consider having dedicated campaigns that measure the populations of specific species as a benchmark or something like that. Just would be my suggestion. Maybe there's one species that we really want to focus on, or let's see one functional group or something, and then one could dedicate an effort to collect data on that species. But others know much more about this.
We will probably heard about the other days. Is it another question? No, this is the same question. I can go somewhere, probably. Sorry. Are you in TropEcS also planning to go beyond standard modeling and implement interactive features, moving towards decision support tools or digital twins? Well, you in TropEcS is not really the panel discussion we currently have here. I think the discussion we can have in the coffee break, maybe at the posters when we talk about the TropEcS in general, rather than with this panel, because we have experts here that can cover other topics. How to include the biological parameters in the physical approaches. For example, bottom changes of sand, mud, reefs, mangroves, seagrass. Can you comment on that?
I can comment. I think it's a very important question to consider which parts of the biology should be incorporated as a diagnostic and which as a prognostic variable. So which, for example, if I take algae, I think they could have a physical impact on the coastal ocean because they interfere with radiation. But other biological aspects may not interfere with the physical part of the system. So we have to see which feedback loops are closed, right, and which are not. So.
Any of you want to add on that?
But I'm mostly a physical oceanographer, so. But for these issues, actually, if we think more specifically, is what human beings need. What do we need for these informations? Okay, so for example, for the bio ecosystems, BGC part, maybe if we think about fish, it's mainly because of the fish stock things. Then we can see, oh, okay, what can affect the fish stock? So maybe start from that part to track what we really need to model.
Yeah, we have 2 more questions, and then we need to wrap up due to time. So how would you model? No, this is the one we had before. Sorry. How can we ensure sustainable trust in AI models in Earth system model, considering the rapid advancement of models being designed and trained by previous models? Is the black box bottleneck really solved by XIA? I think that goes to you, Veronica.
Really?
I took a photo now that I catch the whole one. How can we ensure sustainable trust in AI models and ESM, considering the rapid advancement of models being designed and trained by previous models? Is the black box bottleneck really solved by XAI? Okay. Yeah, so I mean, I'm taking this very serious, and as I was mentioning, we just had a full workshop on how we can ensure sustainable trust. So there are various things to that. First of all, the model needs to be evaluated just in the same way as any other system model, or be it high resolution or coarse resolution. But then there come a few things on top. So basically, the physical consistency and the ability to be compliant to physical laws. We already had that. So that's one thing where we now get together, currently writing up a paper on how we can actually test the physical consistency. So that starts with mass conservation and so on, but it goes further, like Clausius Clapeyron, is it even hold in the models and so on. So we have to test that. We are on that. And then I think the sustainable trust goes into what happens when we use them out of samples, so out of distribution. Usually the machine learning is very good in interpolation, not necessarily good in extrapolation. So we really have to test that. For that, we would define out-of-sample tests the models would need to pass, and we just had a discussion on that at the Climate Bench workshop. So we had a Paleo presentation here. So Paleo is a good benchmark. Also, like some typical benchmarks like plus minus 4K, where you at least can see whether the model behaves in the way you would expect. I hope that alludes a little bit to the first part of the question, is the black box bottleneck really solved by XAI? I think we do have really, so the black box argument comes from quite a few years back. I do think we have extremely nice tools to understand what the neural network actually does with XAI. And as I was mentioning, we are also using, so you can actually even use this to learn something about the system. I presented sequential feature selection, so you learn which variable is most important for specific quantity of interest, and you can also do this on a regional scale. So you can see which variables or which physical parameters are impacting most on let's say GPP or whatever other variable. We have studies on that, and XAI is really a great tool for that. So if you don't use it, I think then it remains a black box. But I do believe people who are working on developing these AI hybrid models do quite a bit of work of using XAI to overcome this black box issue. So I would say solved.
Okay, we have some more questions, but in the interest of time, I think we need to wrap up this discussion. So these questions are saved, and maybe we'll look into them for our discussion for the perspective paper. But I would ask you to maybe give your key takeaways from today on the global and regional Earth system modeling, the coupling between them, and the representation of the coastal oceans in them. Don't know what you think. You just have the mic. Do you want to start? Some key takeaways. What did you learn today? What did you...
Key takeaway, we have so much we have to do. Yeah, particularly because when I'm still thinking about the last question about the AI things. Because I think expandable AI is something we should move forward. We can try to explain the AI. One example is because we have actually used that AI to predict the answer, and we found if we add some physical constraint in it, the prediction ability can enhance. So expandable things is actually one issue. Mm-hmm. But anyway, I found to wrap up from my point is, for each, we still have a lot of different components we have to do, but each of them we still have to investigate more. That's what I think.
Yes.
Yeah, so my takeaway is a very optimistic perspective, because I think from what I've heard today, the physical aspects of modeling coastal processes are under control, and we can do it. It takes a little bit of effort, but there are networks in place that can help, and there are experts in the room that already have a clear idea of what's going to happen. So I'm pretty optimistic that that's not even the bottleneck. We have the computing resources, we have access to the technology we need, so I think that can be done. I think there's a huge perspective in TropEcS, because first of all, the Institute has the collaborative networks in the tropics in the countries that are, let's say, more difficult to access in terms of field work, but the networks are there. And in fact, the information we so far have on climate prediction or climate change in the tropics is so far underexplored. So there's potential also concerning climate research in the tropics, which we should harvest as an institute. So I'm very optimistic that as long as we can talk to each other, get the ecological modeling into the game now, we are in pretty good shape, actually. Yes.
As long as. Veronica?
Yeah, so it's a very exciting topic, and we heard really great talks. I think it's absolutely fantastic that we have the opportunity now to resolve some of these processes with different approaches, as we discussed, from high resolution, from AI, from machine learning based downscaling. We should aim for consistent information, but maybe one point I would like to make, we also had talks on the carbon sink is turning into a carbon source in Africa and also Australia, according to, let's say, this model. And I think what is important, these are really key questions we need to answer. Properly, we need to be totally frank with the uncertainties. So in the carbon cycle, in the carbon weather, like we have huge uncertainties, the models still don't agree on the sign and so we really need to be very open to the uncertainties, do more on uncertainty quantification. And that's maybe even more important when you just zoom into a region, you propagate all these uncertainty that you have in the first place from global model. I don't know, we are not very good in error propagation, but maybe we should think about this too. Otherwise, I personally think it's a very exciting topic. So good luck to everyone who's working on that.
Thank you, and thank all three of you. So we learned a lot that we need to learn and a lot that we probably can learn, is what I understood from your end questions. So yeah, thank you for your input.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.